All right, we're live. This is Renee here at Origins Parkour. I'm joined by Derek Hansen of SprintCoach.com, and this was your idea. So I'm gonna let you take it away.
I coerced you. Okay, so what I thought was let's do something during the holidays and get people together and just talk about more or less athletic qualities. You know, I always use the sprinting as my foundation. We did a thing. But maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we're here and we're going over what are the key things in sprint training that would transfer to what you do here in terms of the parkour. The great thing is we also have like lots of kids playing here, and it's pretty unstructured. So I like that. I like seeing that. But then we talked about, okay, if we had to structure things, how would we, make things better in terms of whether it's jumping onto something, whether it's skipping over things. And I think the thing that we came up with was that if you work on speed, sprinting, acceleration, a lot of that stuff will transfer. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today was, and one of the questions we had before was, well, I'm not really fast, but I really haven't worked on it. And I think that's the key. If you don't work on it, then it's really tough to get faster or actually even maintain qualities. And even in the work I do with professional sports, that's the conversation I have is how do you stay fast? Because I know, like, I'm 48 now and I'm not fast. Some of that is because I don't work on it enough because I'm so busy with other things. But, there's a natural aging process too. But if you don't use it, you will lose it. So how do we do that? How do we make people better at this stuff here? That's what I want to get into. And what I want to ask you, Renee, is after we met and we went over some stuff, what were some of the things that maybe worked for you right away where you're like, okay, this makes sense?
Well, I learned I have no front side mechanics. So implementing just the drills with that right away, and the idea of the rhythm of my takeoff as well, because I think before just that session with you, my idea for a takeoff was always accelerating faster and faster and faster to the point of takeoff. Granted, in parkour, it's shorter run-ups usually. Yeah. I don't have the option always to create a 30 stride approach or something to get into a jump. Yeah. So I would be starting off kind of slow and speeding up into it, whereas we kind of talked about phases. So just having that in mind, along with just the drills. There was doing any kind of sprint work or sprint drills before a session where I'm going to be doing any kind of jumps later already helps a lot.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the interesting thing is that you sent me some video of stuff that you'd done after, and you said, oh, how old are you?
I'm going to be 32 in a bit.
Oh, geez, really young. So you were showing me, I think, video of a guy who was younger and more elastic, and you said, oh, it's easier for him to do this, this, and this, and I have to put more work into it. And this is something you see in sports all the time, is that some people are going to have natural qualities that just lend itself to be able to run faster, jump better. That doesn't mean that you can't work on stuff and get better and maybe have a different strategy. And that's how I think some of the better athletes stick around in professional sports, is they figure out how to develop these strategies, maybe as part of training, maybe as part of just implementation. But, I wanted to get people together and talk about your individual situations and go, okay, what is your experience in working on speed, or have you not worked on speed, and maybe it's something you want to talk about more and get into. But also we talked about injuries, and maybe some people just aren't working on high intensity, why they're getting injured. So, I want to kind of open it up to some of the people here, and if there's any, what are some questions you have about sprint training, plyometrics, anything explosive where maybe you're a little scared and you don't know, because it is a little scary. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is some people don't want to do it because they might get hurt. But at the same time, they're involved in activities where they actually have to move fast and be explosive, and they're going to get hurt. So maybe you have to do some intense stuff to get better and more resilient. So we talk a lot about you because you had a pretty significant injury, Achilles rupture, and how have you been dealing with that?
Yeah, and I don't think I'm very old. I think I'm kind of old for parkour, being that I've been doing it for about 14 years now. And when I started, I felt like I had a lot of room to improve. also just training age. There's only so much after a certain point in doing a sport where you can still improve. And one of the things for me is just focusing more on speed training now, focusing on drills to try to become more elastic. How much more elastic can I become at where I am right now? Because I've been doing parkour in a lot of ways is plyometric. We have a lot of activities where we're doing plyometric type jumps. We're taking shock and we're moving forward with it. But the stuff that you're having me do is still different from that. And I'm still curious, kind of, and I think a lot of other people that do parkour as well are curious about where things like a skip fits into training, where running A fits into training, because similar to other sports too, I think a lot of the more intuitive thing to do is just do the sport more. So I'm going to get and in a lot of ways that's true, is like I'm going to get the most improvement if I'm just playing the game. And in parkour, that's going to be I'm going out in the street and I'm finding really hard jumps to do. I'm getting the mental improvement from that. I'm getting the variability of the different environments, so it's giving me a different look. And I'm doing jumps, so I'm just doing more jumps, and that's working for me. Which works more for, I think, the people we talked about that maybe have the gifts to begin with. Yep. So it's hard. It's a hard sell to say, hey, I want you that's just been going out and doing this sport rather intuitively to now start doing these skips, these running A's, these things like that. So where does that play in?
That's a really good question, because in your case, I think you can create variability by environments, right? So if you go to a more difficult scenario, and I don't know what that is. I just watch your videos go, that's scary for me. All of that's scary. But if you have to jump higher, if you have to drop from a higher height, then you're imposing more stress. So the choice of your environment is going to make a difference in terms of that variability and that intensity. When you play sports, it's going to be who you're competing against for the most part. So the environment may be fixed in terms of the equipment and the facility, but the opposition changes, so that provides variability. But at some point, like you said, it bogs down and there's not enough intensity change or variability, so you have to actually introduce that in your training. And it was interesting, when I was in New York, I had, I think it was Brandon Marshall, plays for the New York Giants, and he's an older athlete, and he goes to me like, can I get faster? I'm in my 30s, I've been in the NFL for this long, can I run a fast 40? I'm like, of course I wanted to impress him. I said yes, but at the same time, it really depends on what he's done in the past. And if he has not turned over certain rocks, then yes, maybe he could get faster, or he could at least maintain his speed longer. And then the next guy to come up was Odell Beckham, and he's like, I want to run a 4.2. How do I do that? And I'll keep the conversation secret. But there are things, again, if they were deficient or not present in their training, or the competition wasn't intense enough, then there's things that you can do. So, it really depends on how you want to manipulate it, based on your competition, based on your environment, and then how you want to really talk about training. So that's what I want to talk to the people here about, is what are your experiences in working with speed? And I got my friend Kyle here, and he's now working with track and field, so he's actually working full on with just running speed, which is unique for a lot of people. Like, hey, I just got to make them faster, and you have to get results right away, otherwise you're exposed, right? In your case, you have to get results, otherwise you're going to do a face plant into a concrete wall. So it's a little less forgiving, but in the same vein, it is tough. So Kyle, do you want to kind of jump in and kind of grab the mic there and talk about what your experience has been?
Well, so far, I'm in my first season with track and field at St. FX University, and we've started with just working on some simple acceleration work, working through drills and postural work, and we've found a lot of success with this so far, keeping things very short. So even our long sprinters are not going very far, but we're just getting a lot of repetition with good technique throughout the whole thing. So we're going to progress that over time, but just working through a lot of technical aspects. They haven't had this experience before. They haven't done a lot of drills and simple things that we.
Which is.
They've mainly just had a program before, been told to run, and just repeated running. But nobody's gone over block work. Nobody's gone over how to set up in the blocks. So their first steps are inconsistent all over. They tend to fall more frequently than they should, which really sets up a poor 60.
Yeah.
So working on just setting up the blocks in the first 10 meters has been huge for them. And then we're just pulling that out further and further. And we've seen a lot of success so far in the first meet for the rest of the season. But we'll see where that goes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm curious about the role of drills in building speed. So I'm a long distance runner,
Yep.
and I do track work regularly, but I've never done any drills. And I'm wondering, can drills build your speed, or I guess raise your basic, pace threshold alone? Because I always felt it had to be done through the sprint work on the track.
That's a good question, because a lot of people will get really dogmatic about drills and like, oh, you have to do these drills. And I don't necessarily think they're absolutely necessary. Again, if we go back to your history and maybe and your mechanics, and we figure out, hey, maybe there's something that we can improve in terms of where your hips are, your posture, your foot strike, and that's something you can isolate in a drill. And I think that you can really focus on, and then we take you back to the running on the track, preferably to start with, and then go, okay, has that improved? And maybe we have measurables like we do high-speed video of your foot strike and say, hey, your ground contact looks more efficient, it's shorter, it's quicker, it's more elastic. And maybe that was because of the drill intervention. So we take you and we isolate it in a drill, put you back on the track, you go for a longer run, and we see how that works out. But it's not like drills are always present. Sometimes you bring them in to fix something. Sometimes you do it to introduce a concept. But it's not, it's very individual, I would think. I think there's a base level of drills I would probably get you to do. And we can go over some of that right now or today. But the idea would be, if I'm a long distance runner or if I'm a sprinter, it doesn't really matter, because if you have postural issues, we have to correct that somehow. And it's very hard to send somebody on a run and go, oh, put your hips here and put your arm here and put your head here. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you can cue people like that. But a lot of the time it's difficult unless you isolate it and just say, okay, we're just going to focus on your posture. We're going to take your arms out of it. Maybe we'll just have some knee lifts or something. And then it gets a little easier to manage. And then, again, we throw you back into running. How do you look? How do you feel? Okay, that looks better. And then the question will be, just like anything, will you retain that quality? And so there might have to be a minimum level of drills that you maintain in your program to maintain that quality. Because I think a lot of the time people argue like, well, drills are for technique. Oh, drills are just for strengthening. And I think it's both. Like, you strengthen somebody by putting them in the proper position with the drill, and they activate the muscles they need to activate. But there's a technical component, like you have to have the right mechanics to activate those muscles in a certain way. And so that's where it gets, be a few drills that you do 2 to 3 times a week. What those are, I don't know yet. I can't until I see you run. Then it gets interesting. Like, okay, your pelvis is running this way, your arm swing is a little, backside, or your foot strike's a little off, and then we fix. Usually, like I did with Renee, we go through the drill and say, this is how I'd fix it with the drill, and then this is how I would cue you when you're. But some, and it's that variability thing that Renee talked about. Like, you have to introduce something a little different to kind of change somebody's mindset. That you can't just do it the same way all the time. That's insanity, right? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So we take you into a drill, we try something different, and a lot of time when I was in New York, we took some people through drills, and sometimes I can see it's not working. So do I keep hammering you with the same drill? Probably not. I have to change that up, and I have to say, okay, let's try it a little differently. Maybe this will work a little differently. And sometimes it's trial and error, but that's fine. I don't have a problem with admitting that, like, I'm tinkering a bit. So does that make sense?
Great. Yeah.
Like, have you had much experience doing drills?
I haven't done much in the way of drills at all. And we do some drills for warm up before the track, but actual, like, to target technical aspects of my running, no. So it's usually, just the track work and alternating, between 400s, 4x400s, or threshold pace and that kind of thing. But I was wondering if the drills were more about, say, I'd assumed they were about fast twitch muscles. I didn't realize they were so much about form.
It's very, yeah. It can be, like it depends what drill we do, but some of them could be more postural, more slow twitch, you know, taunt to hold you in. Right? We could go into faster drills that will work on foot strike. But yeah, it's definitely, and we'll see. We'll take you through a couple of things here and just go, okay, you know, this is what I would start with. And then we could talk at the end about how much of this do you do. And especially like with the weather, it's not great weather here right now. So running outside isn't always, you know, my first choice. So in an enclosed space like we have here, we could set up a whole drill routine where you could, you know, have a great workout and not have to really run that far, but you can do get a lot of work accomplished. So we'll kind of cover that as well.
That'd be amazing.
So Renee talk for a while.
Oh, great. I was gonna throw back to you because we have some parkour world questions.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, specifically for you. This one's a bit maybe a bit vague for today, but we'll try our best. So Derek, you were just talking about training for resiliency. Do you have some key exercises or drills that you consider to be essential for building resilient speed and power athletes?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Good question. Building resiliency through training is, again, that's probably going to be, the answer is going to be what combination of work are you going to do to expose yourself to the right amount of stress, right? And, you know, I don't want to go on promoting my book, but I did a whole book on plyometrics, and the whole idea there was, okay, we put together a whole bunch of exercises for plyometrics, but they're kind of risky, right? So if you have somebody jump over a hurdle or jump off a box, you know, some bad stuff can happen. You know, very much like the parkour world where you're jumping off of things and you don't really know, hey, can I tolerate this? So the whole point of any of this stuff is going to be some sort of progression where you feel like, okay, I've done a certain volume, maybe I'm a little sore the next day, you know, and then you kind of go from there and you're kind of inching through it and you're not doing anything too drastic too quickly. And it's the same thing, I would say, if you're setting people up in a course for parkour, you're not going, well, I've never seen that guy jump this far. You know, you're going to say, well, I've seen him jump about 80% of that distance, so maybe we'll work to 90% of that distance. And I just think it's common sense and it's progressions. And if I were to pick exercises, I think, and this is why I keep going back to sprinting, is sprinting has an eccentric component, but it's very elastic, it's very concentric for the most part, the acceleration part. And so it's a good way to start people before you even do plyos, is get them to accelerate, and then people will say, well, do you work on deceleration a lot? Well, they kind of have to decelerate as part of the work because you accelerate and they don't just fall to the ground. They have to actually decelerate, and you kind of get them to do a soft deceleration. So there's a progression there. They're decelerating, they're accelerating, there's concentric, there's eccentric, there's elastic, plyometric, and then you can work to kind of bigger rocks where maybe you're doing little hurdle jumps or little single leg hops before you get to jumping off some of these bigger obstacles like we see here in this environment. We have lots of kids here. I didn't get, yeah, hi. Sorry, I didn't get you to sign the photo waiver. But you know, they're going to be more resilient. Their body weight is less, so the progression is kind of inherent in their makeup. Whereas as you get a little older, you have to be a lot more careful in what exercise you choose and how much volume you tend to do with that exercise. And that's a bigger question. But hopefully that kind of answers, you know, if I'm going to pick an exercise, it may resemble something like something or jumping onto something, and maybe you just pick a box that's lower and you build up some volume over those lower amplitudes, and then something a little higher. But and everybody wants to be awesome right away, but you know, bad things can happen, as you found out. I don't even know if it has to do with your progression, but
yeah, there's a number of things I can point to for. I don't like to overanalyze why an injury happens like that, because a lot of it was just the position I was in. But you can look at Kobe Bryant, David Beckham, who, like, you know, famous people that had Achilles tears, and you look at what happened when it happened. Yeah. They were taking a step on a court or on a field, on a stride, and then snap, right?
So they've done thousands of times before.
Yeah, running up a wall, and it was on the wall strike where there's a lot of friction because of the footwear I'm using, because of the wall itself, because of the position. I had great dorsiflexion, a lot of range there, and just kind of running up the wall to the point where range and it gave out. And there's no pain before that. There was nothing else. I can point at things like I did. That was at the end of the summer. At the beginning of the summer, I did 8 weeks really intensive program where I did a whole lot of depth jumps, going off of like a Verkhoshansky template, because I thought that was a good idea at the time. I may have been doing enough rebounds or depth jump to bounding kind of things already before that, and that's kind of where I'm sitting now with it. Is sure, I could do a program where I structure a bunch of depth jumps, not doing what I normally do, which is actually like jumping on very specific targets and things and get a little bit more max effort out of there. But I definitely can't do that and like play the game at the same time. No. I'd have to take time away to do that sort of volume. So volume has been the thing. You're just talking about resiliency, and we can list exercises for everybody, but volume seems to be key to avoiding injury.
Yeah. So, and in your case, like you said, a lot of people get caught up in, well, I was, doing all this great training, but they didn't account for the fact that running around and jumping is part of you. So when you don't factor that in, and that's the same with basketball, like nobody should be doing an in-season plyometric program for basketball because you're bouncing around, or volleyball already, and then that could just exacerbate it. And if you're going to do it, it's going to be in very, very discrete amounts, right? The intensity might be there, but you might be doing 20, 30% of what you'd normally do in a training scenario. So, it is an accounting procedure, and I'm a big fan of having high intensity, but all you have to do is start managing the volume of that intensity, right? So we talked a bit about injuries, and in your scenario, do you want to ask some questions about?
Or after having 3 children, so very depleting to the body's resources. And when I started up in parkour, doing some sprint training, which I didn't have any background in, and I hadn't been doing conditioning work at all during the years of my pregnancy and baby raising. So in very short order, I started developing problems with my Achilles. I have a tendency towards tendon problems.
Okay.
Anyways, that seems to be the thing that starts to bother me first if I'm doing too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely struggled with some tendon problems in the first phase of starting up with parkour, and then recently it's coming back a little too. So just wondering about if there are things where beginners to the sport, whether there's some preparation that you recommend prior to even the sprinting. Whereas you mentioned using sprinting as preparation for other things, what if they're not even quite at the sprinting
really good question
level yet?
Yeah, and that's kind of the risk that goes in with my prescription, is like, hey, sprinting is great, you got to do it, and then of course people go out and sprint, pull their hamstrings and blow out their Achilles. That's not so good. So what I would say to that is, obviously having some sort of plan of how you're going to integrate the sprinting is going to be important. And I do this a lot with professional teams where they start our off-season training, next week, what do we do? And the last thing I want them doing is doing really high-intensity sprints right up. We'll do things like we will do easy sort of walk-in or jog-in, transitioning into a faster run. So it's not like you're on the starting line and you're just exploding off the line. Might be something very gradual. The other thing is, what kind of are you doing? So, I had a lot of friends who were runners who had Achilles issues, and they found when they were on surface, it really bothered them. But then when they were in sort of a minimalist shoe on a softer surface like grass, it made a big difference. Like, it just unloaded their Achilles a lot more, or maybe because they were on the ground a little longer. When you're on a softer surface, you're going to be on the ground, kind of disperse the stress a little more if you're on there longer. If you're on a harder surface, it's more elastic, which will aggravate the tendons to a degree, right? So maybe we get you to start not, hey, hey, let's start all your drills on grass, something softer. And even like sometimes artificial turf is, so find a nice grass surface and do something up drills, because even the position, so if I go and I'm doing an upright drill like this, I'm not getting a lot of dorsiflexion as if I was accelerating. If I accelerate, it's going to be in a lot more stress on the Achilles. So finding positions that put less stress on your Achilles in the early phases is important too. So maybe upright running is better than accelerating initially, which may be counterintuitive, because even Kyle talked about like doing shorter things and moving to longer things. Maybe your first couple of weeks you're doing upright drills and you're running upright more if you're more prone to having Achilles issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so for example, if it's people who are coming here because they want to train in parkour, right? So for example, I was using a minimalist shoe, but I was working on this surface.
This is quite hard.
So what would you do to support people who are coming here primarily because they want to use sprinting as part of their parkour training, but need to work up towards that?
Well, on this surface, I would just do a lot of upright drills, like just, you know, marching, skipping, running drills, rather than accelerating. And that's the thing in this environment. And as I found out speaking to Renee, is that it's a lot of acceleration. Like if you want to get up onto that box, you have to put some effort and you have to accelerate rather quickly. So that in itself is stressful. And you may think, oh, I'm just jumping up onto a box, but you're putting, and the other thing with parkour that I found out is you need a lot of repetitions. So you're putting in a lot of repetitions. You're just thinking, I just got to get up on that box. But this whole time, you're putting a lot of stress through your feet and your ankles and your Achilles. So maybe there is, and I know as a kind of a business entrepreneur guy, you want to get people jumping on boxes as soon as possible, right? But there could be, you know, if I had 3 kids and, you know, maybe there's a certain segment of the population where like, okay, we're going to bring you along a little more gradual. Maybe we have a drill warm-up that involves some drills that help strengthen, and then by week 4, we're going to have a little more acceleration. But you know, that could be planned out if we have people that could be deemed at risk for those types of, you know, injuries, chronic conditions. And it's unfortunately it's not fun for me to go, I'm going to hold you back for a bit. But in the long run, it's going to be a lot more enjoyable than having to deal with, you know, tendinitis and joint pain. So I mean, that's where I would start. And again, as part of this demo here, we can kind of show you what I would do. And how I would keep it pretty simple. And then even the sprung floor that they have over there, maybe you do a lot of your drills on the sprung floor to reduce some of the impact initially. And that could be incorporated into sort of a group warm-up that everybody does with some little micro plyos that make it a little, you know, easier to handle at the beginning. And then we get you onto the harder surfaces like this and jumping on. And then there's a little more lead into that more intense work. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, so I'm not saying that he's doing, you know, people are doing it wrong. I'm just saying maybe there's individual differences that we have to account for and go, okay, we're going to bring you in a little slower, and, you know, maybe there's some things, maybe you just jump into the foam pit or something more. I don't know, like to get that part, to get the dopamine going. But I would say make use of some of the stuff like floor, doing upright drills on this turf piece here, which I understand you're going to upgrade at some point. Okay, we'll talk. You know, coming up with strategies that fit your circumstance. And I think it's tough because you see other people jumping around and doing fun stuff, and you're like, I want to do fun stuff too, right? And I would be no different, and then, you know, I'd probably have to deal with some sort of sore back or sore knee or something later, right? So anyways,
just problem there, and I don't know, maybe you can speak on this, but adding in just some things at the end of training sessions, just some simple eccentric movements to load the Achilles, or if you have patellar problems for jumping, that might help to a little bit more, just to supplement some of the jumps and the low amplitude plyometrics that you're talking about, just to increase the integrity of the tendon a little bit more. It might help the situation. I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's definitely strength you can have as part of your, your regular activities where you go, okay, we're going to do some squatting, we're going to do some other types of plyos, maybe some med ball work, and which you probably integrate already, right? So, it's just looking at all the pieces and going, what is the proper way to move you forward without inflaming that issue? Because even with strength training, some people can take it too far and then, oh, my back hurts, my knee hurts, and this was supposed to help. But it is very dosage dependent for everybody, and what I can handle is going to be different than what you, particularly if you're prone to tendon, ligament type issues. And who knows, like a friend of mine was talking about this, and they were saying, oh, this person has these chronic tendon issues. And then, well, when was the last time that she had a blood test? Like, maybe you have to look at something a little more global too, if you're prone to that. And that's not my area, but I'm just saying, have an open mind when diagnosing these things and coming up with solutions. So, but you're going to contribute. Yeah.
I was just, one of my questions maybe goes back to the drills.
Yeah.
How do you see kind of slower coordination movements transferring to faster? Drills, do you see that then transferring into faster jumps or so on?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm a huge proponent of specificity, right? So if I do something slow, will you be able to do it fast? Not necessarily, right? But I think there's this concept of a teaching process, like you're going to learn the alphabet before you learn to spell words and make sentences, right? But just because you learn the alphabet doesn't mean but you have to learn the alphabet first. And so if you're introducing a drill, doing it slow is a way to master a movement, right? So if you're doing a Olympic lifting movement, if you're doing a running drill, make sure somebody can do it slow. Mean that they're going to have mastery at higher velocities or higher levels of complexity? Absolutely not. But it does help bridge the gap, and it does create discussion for, this is where I think your hip position should be, this is where your head position should be, this is where your arm should swing. And then, things start to click for people because you've introduced it in a controlled environment where things are slower. And then I think it would be like rehearsing a scene, if you're an actor, like maybe you take things a little slower, maybe you're looking at your lines on the script, to get you started, and so when you actually have to shoot the scene, you have some familiarity with it. So those are my lame analogies, but the idea would be, yes, it's a good way to introduce a skill. Is there going to be transfer? For most people, maybe not, but it will help you down the road, in my opinion. You have to have gone there, and there's some context there where you can discuss your arm should swing, where you should look when you're running. And then if you've done it slow, now it makes it easier for them to comprehend where it's going to go under a faster condition. The other part of it is, when you do things slow, experience that you're trying to get there. So you're doing some slow, you're doing some medium, you're doing some fast, but that accumulation of work will help make something more intuitive and more reflexive later on. And so, but if you don't do that, if you don't, do your 10,000 hours, then it's really hard to put it together later, especially when you're moving really fast and you can't even think about these things. Does that make sense?
Can I ask?
So there is a place for it to do it slow, but it's part of a process. So,
so once you have, let's say, developed a skill, do you then do the drills always at full speed, or do you ever vary the intensities even after they've kind of perfected the drills?
Yeah, no.
Do you just keep it at a high intensity, or then do you still, and how?
Very good question. Again, we got some smart people here. The idea would be, yes, in types of exposures, because again, whenever we learn something, it's, I think, if we use language, right? I'm always speaking English to everybody, but I spent some time in Quebec and I learned some French, and then now that I haven't been there for 20 years, I can't speak that much of it anymore because I'm not exposed to it. So there has to be a maintenance of every quality that you learn, and you have to kind of revisit it constantly. How much? It's going to vary by person, right? So yes, you would have to do some slow, some medium, some fast, And I would say mix it up so that you do have your vocabulary, you do have your sentence structure, and and then you can put it together much easier when you have to do everything fast. But I think the problem with trying to do everything fast all the time is it wears you out. It's difficult to do everything high quality all the time, and so having that variability gives you a bit of a mental break. And I think that's pretty important, and I would say that's probably the same with the stuff you do. He's not going to do all the big jumps and the complex stuff all the time. Would you say there's a routine that you would put people through to kind of keep maintaining qualities?
Well, I think that's actually something lacking in most people is they only do hard days. So they only train on days where they're feeling good, and they only hit the hardest things they can do. And that includes like with weight training or any other work to do. I'm not going to go do any supplementary work, and I'm not going to do any technical work unless I'm having a good day. Or they just they're young and they can go 6 or 7 days a week straight hard days, or 3 days in a row straight hard, and not have any effects from that, negative effects from that yet. So that's kind of something lacking just in the culture in general. Is like you said. You want to do the cool stuff. You want to play the game. You want to do the jumps, all the things you see people doing in the gym all the time. You don't want to be off on the side just thinking about like, okay, I want to have my arm positioned this way when I'm doing this, and I need to make it a habit, so I need to repeat it a bunch of times. No one wants to do that. They want the quick answer, the short answer of, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this jump. All right, you want me to fix this? Teach me how to do it while I'm doing it, not outside of it. But for most people, they can't go hard every day. So you have 3 or 4 days a week sometimes where you're not doing the hardest work. And on those days, those are the days where you could do drills, particularly things like something you opened my eyes up to was just utilizing the spring floor, which a lot of gyms that I know of are taking them out because traditionally spring floors have only been used for acrobatic movements. So they've been used just for teaching tumbling, gymnastic type stuff, not for sprint drills. I think you're the first person that ever brought it to my attention, is using a sprung floor to do any kind of jumping drill. And I try to bring this to the attention to just another like fellow peer, and his anecdotal kind of experience with it is like, oh, I did vertical jumps on spring floors before, and it ruined my vertical jump but it was more because he wasn't practicing on the hard floor to go with it. It was he did a bunch of I think he was doing cheerleading or something in high school, and he said it ruined his vertical jump because he was doing all kinds of jumps as part of the cheerleading practice on the spring floor, running into a jump, doing a vertical jump on the spring floor, and not doing any sort of vertical jump practice on hard floor. Went back to that at the end, and is like, oh, I can't jump as high. I was like, of course you can't jump as high because you need to do both. Yeah. But if I have a day where I plan to do some sort of sprint work and I don't get enough sleep, or I'm just sore from the last session, I can still be disciplined and still get some work done on the spring floor, and that's been really great so far.
Yeah, all that sprung floor is just a different option, and maybe everything you do on there could be classified as low intensity. Like we said with your drills, like maybe I spent a month with you just doing drills on the softer floor, and now you're building strength qualities that when we take you to a harder surface make you more resilient. I don't think everybody wants everything to be absolutely specific and go, oh, I'm going to be running on concrete, so I should train on concrete. And it's the same with long distance running. Like if I were training people for marathons, yes, you have to be on a hard surface, but if you want to get your mileage up and not have all these knee issues and shin issues, maybe pick a softer surface for off days, or but black or white, and there's a lot of gray in all the training solutions that we have to come up with. And so that means you have to have an open mind to trying different things. And maybe some people needs more slow drills. I don't know, but if we examine everybody's situation, everybody's going to have something slightly different that we have to adjust. And so, yeah, just making people think differently about it. Now, my question to you, Renee, is what kind of things have you built into your program to take advantage of, like maybe some lower intensity things that will add value?
Well, from a technical standpoint, there's certain environments. So one thing that I know freaks you out every time I do it, or anything, is jumping to a rail.
Jumping to a rail, it absolutely freaks me out. I will never do that. I can say that right now.
And most athletes in parkour, they can't do their maximum ability jumping to something like a rail. They might tell you otherwise. They might tell you they can still do their max jumping to a rail. Chances are it's not their true maximum jump. There's some deviation there. So change the structure I'm working with. So I will have like a medium day where I'm doing a lot of work on the bars. Whether it's swinging or whether landing on them is something I can do it from a technical side. From a more supplementary side, like sprinting and whatnot, being able to do things as you suggested on a sprung floor, which should be kind of intuitive, and I think it is from the the acrobatic side of things. Like a lot of guys that specialize in the acrobatics take an easy day and be like, oh, I'm just gonna spring floor today. I'm not gonna do anything. You know, it's kind of intuitive there, but none of the guys that specialize in jumping or running at things think about using that as a tool for their training, which they could.
Yeah, the other thing that freaks me out that you do is you run and you land on these posts. Like it's just like a post, I guess it's to keep traffic out, but it's like maybe, what, 8 inch?
It's a bollard.
Bollard or whatever, yeah. That freaks me out. Could you stop doing that?
I'm trying to get better at that.
Because if you miss, because I'm going to be the guy that's going, if he misses, it's going to be a bad day for him and me. So I just, yeah, that stuff freaks me out. So, but, yeah.
I want to go back to questions here, because so one of these I think we've kind of gone over already was just someone a plyometric training session for increasing distance. And I think we just the variables, like it kind of depends. There's we can't just give out a, or maybe we can a little bit.
I mean, like so like that's the common thing. Like I want to improve my vertical jump. What do I do? Well, okay. I mean, first examine what you're already doing. And so if you're doing a lot of concentric jumps, and that's where it gets a little crazy. People do these feats of like power. And, oh, maybe they just have flexibility to get their knees past their ears, right? And just, you know, land really acrobatically as opposed to actually increasing their actual jump height. So maybe you set some parameters where you're doing jumps where it's on, you know, how high you can lift your knee, and maybe getting your hip height, measuring your hip height, ways to do that. But I would think, you know, looking at your concentric jumps, how much counter movement jumps you're doing, how many depth jumps, what kind of external resistance you're using. So maybe you're using like you're throwing a med ball, maybe you're I don't know, sometimes people use bands or there's those Vertimax things, so that's a resistance. Maybe you have a vest on with weight, but it's not excessive. Maybe you're doing actual explosive lifts in the weight room environment. But I think it's looking at all these ways of adding stimulation and varying the intensity and the load and trying to put something together where you can see, okay, I'm improving. But just doing jumps itself probably isn't enough. You know, and it's the same as sprinting, and people are getting into resisted sprinting now, like pulling sleds or pushing sleds, and in the old days we used to just find a hill. But now you can get a sled and you can push and pull it, and you're not going to necessarily get faster if you put more weight on the sled, right? If anything, it might slow you down. So you have to be careful about how much you push in one direction. You might do a little bit of that. You might do a little bit of maybe something where you're assisted, you have the wind at your back. I don't know, but you're changing. Like the one thing I always look at is baseball pitchers, and they found that if you throw with a slightly heavier baseball, it's good. If you throw with a slightly lighter one, it's good. So what does it come down to? Some sort of variability, right, that we talked about. So I mean, that's what I would do for jumping, is maybe some resisted, maybe some where you're making things a little easier. Maybe you're changing the surface. Maybe you're putting a little weight on. Maybe you're just looking at different ways to kind of get a different response.
Yeah, I think contrast training is fairly well known now. You can, and there's a variety of ways to do it. Most of it, again, it just depends on volume and person to person. But there's people that'll tell you that you need to be contrasting within a certain amount of minutes. Like you need to be doing a lift and then resting for exactly this much time and then doing a jump. You might you might have an opinion. I think it's up for debate, really. We've also talked about, like, okay, I want to improve my I want to improve my standing broad jump, right? It's like, well, do more of it, right? One thing is, I think some people will enter. It's kind of ridiculous too, because they'll enter a training program. They'll test something, do the program, and then test again at the end, but without doing any of the work in between, or any tests before that. So they have no test to begin with to compare to. They're doing the test for the first time at the beginning of the program, which, you know, we can maybe measure them again next week, and they would have improved because they got some work done in that's just that testing session alone. So there's nothing to compare to. And again, we'll see that somewhat in parkour, probably more in other sports though, where it's just the test and retest is a guaranteed success because they're not even familiar with the testing exercise to begin with. And then they'd probably be even better if they did that exercise throughout the session. So it's like we could do all kinds of other stuff, but you want to improve a broad jumps? Okay, we're going to test your broad jump. Then we're going to do 8 weeks of broad jumps. We're going to do some other stuff with it. Yeah. And then on the final week, we're going to test your broad jump again. Of course, it's going to improve doing it up until that point. Kyle, I don't know if you have something to add there.
Yeah, we've had some experience with that. A couple of our teams, coaches just love testing. So we've tested athletes before that have done nothing and then they improve. And
hopefully none of those coaches are watching right now.
Hopefully none. I didn't specify who. Not at St. FX. But we've had, I've taken some athletes now and worked with them for a year, and now we're going to look at testing them. So we've done little bits of, and you can just see progress just through day-to-day activities. So
you did like a first year of your introduction training with them, and you didn't do any testing.
Right.
It was just kind of faith in that you knew you were doing the right things for them, and now you're going to look at actually improving things from a testing standpoint.
Yeah, we've done some little bits of testing. Aerobic is a really simple one to do. That's not, I mean, nobody likes doing it, but through running someone through a beep test, we can just track that very easily. We can do a short 20-meter sprint, but like I'm not going to put anyone under a maximal load or anything in that sense, and then hope like, oh, I hope you survive. I'm going to build up their technique. So some of our athletes had no experience in a weight room, for example, or no experience with sprint technique. So we would do that work first in the first year, not test them in that area, test them in other areas that they're familiar with, and then and now this year, this off season, we're going to look at testing them now that we've done a year of experience in more complex movements, and we'll see how that tracks now over time.
That makes sense. I think the testing, it's one of those things where you don't want to do too much, but you want to at least have some foundation of testing in there and evaluation. And, you know, I come from a different background where I was using a stopwatch for every run that was done. So you kind of knew, and then people would say, well, do you do any testing? I'm like, well, we kind of test them every rep, you know, so I know where they are. But you can't really do that in other sports as much. So, you know, you have to have some structure. So.
Yeah, we had with like a football team, you couldn't have with 30, 40 guys running. It'd be very difficult to have a stopwatch on every guy, and it's just not possible. Yeah. But we're a lot easier to do that on their individual reps because it's just 1 or 2 or 5 athletes. Easy enough, pen and paper, and just track them over time with certain drills that we do consistently throughout their training plan.
Yeah, cool. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to shut off my live feed on Instagram here. But you can go to Origins Parkour YouTube and keep following here. I want to go through some drills here. Okay, so thank you. Let me just end that. Okay, good. Yeah, here you go.
Sorry. You might be able to use me as a test subject. Although I think the word you used was normal. By the time we finished I felt good about it. I think the word used was normal when we got to the end of the session we did last time. Was that I did a sprint. And you're like, okay, that one looked normal. Was normal, which I was pretty happy with because definitely did not look normal. And when I try to teach sprinting to certain people, particularly when you break it down, you start getting them to focus on things, and it's not natural. Maybe from over cueing or something, and then they're doing something that looks really not normal. So getting to normal was good. But I have a question here from Tom Coppola. He's asking, how much value does more simplified sprinting drills, I guess simplified he means marching, skipping, running A's, that sort of thing. How much value does this have on an advanced parkour athlete with good sprinting mechanics? I think he's talking about himself. I think he thinks he has good sprinting mechanics. I will admit.
Really awesome.
I will admit I will admit I think he has better sprinting mechanics than I do. He did a little bit of track earlier in life, so he's he looks pretty normal. Okay. But we'll let that lead into the sprinting drills. We can kind of talk about again, if I'm doing something well, how long should I keep doing this for? I think it's what he's trying to get at. Is like, okay, I understand how marching works. I understand how skipping works, how running A works. Does this still have value for me to practice, or should I be just doing sprints?
Yeah. Very good question. Of course, I don't want people doing stuff that's unnecessary. Like if you're really good, and there were a lot of athletes that I worked with who did the drills horribly, but when they ran, they looked fantastic, right? Even better than you, Renee. But the whole idea was that, okay, if there was something that arose, like I said, the drills are either active in terms of teaching somebody what the correct technique should look like, or it's reactive, like something broke down and we have to fix it again. So in his case, I would say if everything's going really well, maybe there's a certain drill that you would do. Like I would probably just do maybe more of the elastic one. So I wouldn't do marching. Right? So if his body position is good, his posture and his arm mechanics are good, okay, like we don't necessarily need to rehearse that slow to maintain that, but maybe the skipping, there's an elastic quality that helps. There's more of a physiological component that's maintained, and the running high knee, the running A, is the ground strike and the limb velocity where you're trying to keep it around 4 strides per second. So maybe that is more of a maintenance quality that I would keep in there, a couple of times a week. He doesn't have to do them excessively, but there would be a benefit in maintaining those qualities. Now, if he's doing a lot of other sprint training, like running 40s, 30, 40, 20, 30, 40 at the track 2 to 3 times a week, then maybe he doesn't need to do those things because he's got the elastic qualities from doing those runs. But if he's just doing parkour, then maybe it gets more interesting to keep those types of activities in there to supplement the fact that he's, what's the average approach run? Like 6 to 7 strides, maybe less sometimes, right? So, you're not going to get a lot of volume of running just by doing short approaches all the time. So maybe you are mixing it up with a few drills as part of your warm-up so that you have some vertical force production as part of that drill. Does that make sense from a physiological point of view? Technically, everything might be good, but maybe he needs something to keep working on those pure elastic qualities.
So just to clarify, you're talking about by working on the pure elastic with or with doing sprints.
It depends. Like if you can't, like say he doesn't have access to a track where he could do it, or I don't know, maybe he lives in New York and there's too many people on the sidewalk, so he can't sprint on the sidewalk. In his apartment, he could do the drills like upright running A's on the spot, or we actually have people do it with like a band and tether it, and then they can kind of lean into it a bit and they can do a running A. It just makes it a little easier to do it on the spot. But if he can go to a track and do sprints, then do that. It's much more fun than doing drills, right? But if he doesn't, then you have to look at other alternatives, right? So
I can see Steph just already thinking about things she's gonna do.
It's really good.
She has a house where you can do all kinds of activities.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like you can be creative about it, and you just conceptually have to know, okay, I want to do some things where I'm being more elastic and dynamic. Maybe I do them in bare feet. Maybe I do them on, I put a mat down so I have a little softer surface. But the idea would be that you're doing this 2 to 3 times a week to build up your resiliency, build up your skill in terms of the reflex action of hitting the ground and rebounding off it. And then also it builds your fitness too. Like I had this whole idea where I just do drills with people and they would improve body composition because they're quite tough if you do them right? So, maybe we do that. Maybe we have telephone booth drills where people just run on the spot in their shower and in the bathroom stall and they get really fit. It's not very exciting, but I'm working on it.
It does the trick. It just needs a better name, and then you can sell it. That's all. Parkour in your closet. You can call it, you know.
Anyway, but we'll get you. Why don't we get you up? And that's okay. That's okay. But just from a basic sort of postural point of view, we could get you doing a few things on the spot for demo. Are you comfortable with that? Okay. So we'll get you up. Okay. So when I work with somebody, say we're going to do a marching drill. Okay. So all I'll do initially is get them to start on the spot, because we don't really need to move forward if we can't do it on the spot, you know. So I would get people to start maybe up on the balls of their feet very slightly. I think people say, should I run on my toes? I'm like, no, nobody runs on their toes. Like, animals don't even do that. So you want to be on the balls of the feet with your heel elevated a bit. And the whole idea would be you have some heel travel, right? So you might actually even strike the ground with your heel, but there's a little bit of play in there, right? Okay, so from there, we might start with just a knee lift, okay, on the spot. Yeah, just there, kind of staying up on the ball of the foot, right? Okay, so yeah, so that's something that you could start with somebody, is just getting the knees up, keeping the head looking straight ahead. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, don't worry, your legs are lifting, okay? From there, little thing that I would add is, as you bring your knee up, just pull your toe up towards your shin a bit so that it kind of, yeah, cocks the foot a bit, right? And just do that on the spot. Still with the head up, right? There. So, I mean, right there we're doing little corrective things like posture, because where her head's pointing really affects where her body orients itself, right? So keep going, keep going. Not so high on the balls of the feet, okay? Good, and keep pulling the toe, yeah, good. So that's very simple, right? But it's still challenging you a bit, would you say? Okay, so take a break. I'm going to need you for quite a few more things, so I don't want to exhaust you. The idea would be that why would I advance you any farther than that until I'm certain that you can, yeah, if that's already hard, why would I? So unfortunately, it's really boring. You know, maybe we could have people shoot paintballs at you or something to make it more exciting, but it's pretty boring just to stand on the spot, right? But I need you to be able to do this before I can start throwing in your arms or getting you to move forward or making you move faster, right? So let's do it again. No, actually you get to feel the ground, right? So, and that's the thing, people say, well, do you do barefoot running? I'm like, well, no, but we could do drills in bare feet to start and strengthen people off, right? So, okay, that's pretty good. So as you do that, what do you feel your upper body wants to do? Wants to kind of move with it, right? Yeah, like you can see there's a very slight rotation. So all I want you to do is, as you're doing that, I want you to start incorporating your arms, but just straight, just like that, just straight out, right? Yeah. So that's easier for people to comprehend, is like, okay, a long lever that matches what my legs are doing. So maybe that's what we have you do, and then I'm just going to get you to do a couple of those moving forward, okay? That looks really good, right? Okay, and you can just walk back normally. I can just back up there. So that is in itself kind of the foundation that I would start with, right? And so let's do that again, okay? Yeah, just on the spot. So pull the toes up a bit, that's it. And people, well, that's not that stressful. Well, it doesn't really need to be, because we're just working on technique, and maybe that's that low intensity day thing that we do, right? Okay, so we're going to stop. Now what I want you to do is have your hands just at sort of 90 degrees, and I want you to now cycle through like this as you do the knee lifts, okay? That's way more normal than you. Okay, keep going. Okay, pull the toes up a bit as you draw the knee up. Yeah. That's good. Okay, that is really good. And when you review the video later, you'll see that it looks pretty cool. Okay, so and then let's move forward with that just for a little bit. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Great, that's great. Awesome, come back. Does that feel relatively normal? Like, does it feel like you could do that and not feel uncomfortable?
Yeah,
Yeah.
The things that were most challenging for me was refiguring out my balance from when I was looking down to when I was looking straight ahead.
Yeah.
So I just had to readjust my sense of balance.
Yeah.
And then also not keeping my heels too far up is maintaining that slight lift, but not.
And particularly for somebody with your history, like I would want that heel down more because I don't want to put too much stress through the Achilles, right? So just lower it down, and you feel like you still feel bouncy, right?
Yeah.
But you don't feel like you're up here and you have a higher point to fall from, right? So just nice and sort of bouncy there, and then just feeling like you have a little bit of spring on each step, okay? So let's do that again. So let's go just the march with the bent arms. No, just on the spot, just on the spot. We have limitations here in terms of our studio space. Yeah, so that's good. So what I want you to turn that into now is a skip where you do a little bit of a hop off of that, okay? Good, and let's do a little bit of forward. That's really good. So right there, we have now done a bit of a little model of what I want the technique to look like. She's getting some elasticity from doing the skip, and we can move her forward. I feel comfortable that her technique is good enough to move her forward. So great, now we've accomplished something in just, what is this, about 4 meters of area where I feel like, yeah, okay, if you did this, maybe did this 3 times per week, and we did it over, in your living room or something, I think that's something that could move you forward with some of your other sprinting work or your other running work, okay? So let's try on the spot. So we've done march, we've done skip. Now I want you to do just on the spot, just sort of a running on the spot, okay? Okay, a little faster. There, okay? Keep that going. Yes. Okay, and just relax. Okay, so you'll see there we had her moving, moderately fast, not, comfortable, right? And what's happening there is you're getting, again, some more elastic work. You're able to sustain that because you're not working so hard that you're going to deplete your energy right away. Okay? If we want to go faster and we're going to have to do one of 2 things. One is you're going to have to lift higher here, and you're going to have to get your arms up higher, okay? The other thing is you have to maintain that frequency that you've established. So if you go from here, you can't maintain that if you slow down. So you have to speed up or maintain the leg frequency that you had at that lower speed, okay? So what I want you to do is I'll say, okay, low height, like lift your knees up but not that high, okay? And let's cycle through. So let's do that on the spot. Okay, a little faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, a little faster. There, okay, start lifting the knees up. Start lifting the hands up in front to match. Okay, a little faster, 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 faster. Good, okay, relax. Okay, so what happens is when the knee comes up, I need her to be also front side with the arm to match that. Otherwise, what people will do, they'll tend to go back like this to try to counterbalance and make it easier to lift their knees. The other thing I need you to speed up to kind of keep that going. If you speed it up, it kind of levels you out. If you slow down, then things feel disjointed. So we're going to try it again. So start slow.
Front side mechanics.
Yeah. Front side is going to mean and it's easier when we do a drill because that's the only way you can go. You can't really push back, otherwise you're going to end up into our production guy here. So what you're going to do, it's anyways, it's the same name, so it's confusing. Anyways, so you're going to go front side to the body. So my leg, the weight of my leg is on the front side of my body as opposed to pushing back here, right? So the drills in themselves are front side oriented, right? So that's why it's good to actually do a lot of the drills because it teaches you to be here and not be pushing out back here, okay? The whole point of running faster is get your leg up and impart force into the ground and then kind of vault off of that. It's not about landing and then having this great push off once you've landed. It's accelerate. It's like punching somebody. Like if I wanted to really punch you, I'd start here and I'd aim through about 1 inch of your face, right? But I'm not starting here and going, I'm going to punch you now, right? I'm not doing that. It's not going to be as effective, okay? that's kind of an extreme example, but the idea would be get to here and down, get to here and down. So step over and down, or step front side and down. Okay, so but you don't really have to think about that with this drill, because that's the only thing you can do. I could put you up against the wall and you could do the drill, right? Because you're just going to come front side. So let's start. So all you're doing with this drill is you're going to start front side low, front side medium, front side higher. And the higher you go, the more force you need, which is you'll find it's going to tire you out really quickly. Okay? So let's start sort of a low front side running. Yeah. Okay? And whatever you do with your knees, if you lift your knees higher, now your arms have to come front side more to balance it out, right? Okay? So let's bring it back down again a little bit. There, okay? A little faster. I always say about 4 strides per second. It seems to be, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, a little faster. There. Okay? And let's go a little higher. Okay? Get your arms working a little faster there. And faster, 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 faster. Okay, good, good. So that's not too bad. You know, you'll see that sometimes if they're not executing it well, they'll lean back a bit, and you want them a little more like this. Okay? But, you know, it's not a bad place to start people on the spot. And then if we go over distance, so we'll start further back here, and we're going to progress you forward. Okay, so I'll say everything on the spot, and then we're going to get you to go forward. Okay, so on the spot, low. Okay. A little faster. A little faster. Okay, and faster. And let's go forward a little bit. There, up, 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 up. Okay, not bad. Okay, you almost took Derek out. But this time I want you to go progress maybe at about this speed. So you're still getting lots of steps in, but you're not adding a horizontal component to it too quickly. Okay? So you're going to get a lot of steps in, but you're only going to move about this fast forward. Okay? You're not running with it. You're just still staying pretty vertical. Okay? So I'll walk beside you, and that's how fast I want you to progress forward. Okay, ready? Start on the spot. Faster. 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 Okay, and faster. Let's go. Forward now. Good. Okay, so that's an easy way to get people to get a lot of strides in and work on that verticality, front side. You know, they get a physiological sort of training response from the ground contacts. They work on posture. Maybe you do it in front of a mirror. Maybe they can kind of check them out on a side mirror. You need some mirrors in here, Renee? Do a split screen. Yeah. So, but the whole idea would be give people some feedback, right, as part of their experience and learning, and like, okay, this is what it feels like. Maybe you do it with just somebody that has your phone and takes video of you, and then you review it right after. And then you start putting pieces together of how it should feel and what it should look like. And I think that's when it people start making connections. In the old days, they would just tell you to do it, and the coach would give you feedback. But it's nice for you to see it too, as well. So does that kind of make sense in terms of, and that's something that we could easily start everybody with on the sprung floor. Maybe on here as people got a little stronger, and then it could be part of a warm-up routine. Towards the end of the warm-up, everybody's doing these drills, and it's part of their strength training, it's part of their technique training. And then when you go to do the running and jumping here, things are kind of in place, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you have any comments about what you've just experienced?
Well, just one thing that's on my mind is that right now there aren't a lot of people practicing parkour that are in my demographic, but I'm really hoping that's going to change. So people who are starting up at an older age, or moms who are considering getting into it. So I know it's something you have to consider is where people are coming from, right?
Yeah.
And what they have to do to prepare themselves to do the other things they want to do here. So.
Yeah, and like you said, maybe there is a demographic that's going to be like, hey, that sounds really cool. I want to, do something a little more extreme. But as they come in, you have to identify them and go, okay, well, what have you done recently? Nothing. Okay, well, then you're going to be in this group here, and we're going to work on developing your physical qualities so that you can end up jumping off these things and actually having some fun. But I think if you don't do that step, where you kind of train them before you actually get to do all those crazy things, then you're going to run into problems. Like, nobody's going to be that resilient and that's part of your introductory program, is having all these sort of qualities worked on over, and I don't know what that period would be, maybe like 4 weeks, a 4-week intro, or 3-week, or I don't know, but it's got to be significant enough that people have some adaptive qualities. So, but something to think of. Thank you. How did that go?
So just watching that right now. So for me, I think the running A has been really helpful, but also just the correction on the skip and trying to get that when we talk about front side mechanics. And I'm still going back to just thinking on one of the questions we had about, okay, I'm already someone who thinks this is easy, because I think some of the people that might be watching this from the parkour side of things are looking at this and like, I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time doing this. This is boring. This isn't. How is this helping me? Do run and jump across this gap. What's been working for me so far is just hitting it as hard as I can and jumping. I like to use myself as an example, because I can look at examples of me approaching a jump where it's mostly arms are low and I'm pushing back. And I actually just want to talk about like what the reason for that is, because I remember you were mentioning to me looking at like a kids race, and so you have the kids that are already like know they're elastic, have somewhat good mechanics, and the ones that lose the race essentially, like they have longer strides, are kind of going. So is that more like an adaptation of someone who doesn't have a lot of elastic training or natural elastic quality, is to have like a longer backside sort of movement?
Yeah, I think we're always going to gravitate to what we feel is an effective strategy for us, but it's one of those things. If I'm, in the whatever, I don't know, the 15th century, and I'm thinking, oh, I've got to get better at shooting my bow and arrow, and everybody else is adopting a gun, then it's going to wear out at some point, right? So maybe you have to start learning how to get your mechanics right rather than resorting to a compensatory strategy, right? And so my response to the people are like, hey, I run pretty good already. Yeah, but what if you get to that gap where you're like, I just can't generate enough speed to make that gap now? Well, maybe you have to go back and re-examine your training and go, maybe there's some things I could work on, right? So it all depends on, what your goal and what your challenge is going to ultimately be. If I'm, and you see this all the time, and like I think, I watch UFC, and you always say like, oh, that guy is unbeatable. That guy, nobody will ever beat that guy. And then of course somebody inevitably comes along and beats him because they have a different strategy or different qualities, or maybe even they're better at something. And so, is that guy just resting on his, reputation and going, yeah, I've beaten all these people, I don't need to improve in anything? And then you find out that, yes, you did have to improve in some things. But that means he has to acknowledge that maybe I could be better at something. And I'm not saying that this fellow is not a great runner. He might be awesome, but you put him up to actually against people who actually can sprint properly, and he's very mediocre. Is he good enough to have fun and do things in parkour right now? Probably. Probably he's, has enough ability to make things work. But I would always say, like you and I, we're always trying to improve ourselves in our approaches. We're never getting too what's the word, like just relaxed about, oh yeah, I'm as smart as I need to be. You always have to keep pushing, and in his sense, maybe from a technical point or from a preparatory point of view, he could try some of these things and work on it a bit more. And if he wants to come down here and work with us, and let's take a look and evaluate him with high-speed video and see where everything is, then it could be pretty interesting. So
yeah, I think competition is going to be the real exposing sort of event in parkour, because right now most of the way that the culture is, it's hardly recognized as a sport most places around the world. It's hard to put into like a box and say like these are the rule sets and these are the challenges and this is the way the sport looks like, because it's still very much happening, just people just going out and playing and putting out videos. And the thing with videos, you can do something, you can make it look good. You can make anything look good on video. So the really cool thing about the competition era in parkour now, for me at least, is it kind of exposes weakness. It kind of and it gives opportunity for people that maybe don't have great videos to be able to show that they actually are, you know, athletically competent that way. One segment that comes to mind for me for a competition I was in for a speed comp was we did a very short course. It was about I think between 7 and 8 seconds for the fastest time. So most people fell in between 7 and 8 seconds that were like in the top 10. So you're losing by, you know, such a minimal thing. There's a stretch of the course that had because it's so short. There's a stretch of the course that had about 7 strides, and I remember running it, and I hit my strategy for the first structure, and my strategy for the next 2 structures, and then there's that run in between. And I had my steps counted, so I knew how many strides I was going to take. But after I reviewed the tape of me running, and I was just, I wasn't sprinting, right? There was again, major backside, arms are low, my knees don't come up at all. And I'm thinking, okay, I could have been from, you know, 8th place to 2nd or 3rd in that one, because no one else is training how to run, right? But there's a bunch of guys in the course that naturally run pretty good, or just faster, more elastic. But me being kind of the old guy that day, I could have made up the difference there had I spent more time working on my running mechanics and then being able to apply them in that situation. So for me, there's tons of value in that, particularly as the competition culture grows and we start seeing courses that have actually more running room, but also just for people that just want to be able to jump further. They want to be able to get more speed into approach. There's tons to be gained. It's just, I think, still hard for them to get to get into a situation where, like, I'm going to work on these drills and then hopefully there's going to be some sort of transfer.
Yeah, because I'm sure at some point in the history of hurdling, you know, some people are like, hey, this is just about looking good going over hurdles and making videos and putting them on YouTube, which probably didn't happen. But the whole idea is, like, you got to get to the finish line first, and then that's what creates innovation, right? And technique, and, like, how can I improve my technique to get to the finish line first? So maybe if you do have that time constraint in competition, that it's going to force people to start re-examining their mechanics and their execution. And so, you know, I mean, that would be interesting if people would, you know, you would have a standardized setup and that people could have, you know, the same, I don't know, timing equipment, and people, you know, hey, this is my attempt at this course and this was my time. And now people are like, oh, geez, I got to beat that time, right? Rather than just eyeballing it going, yeah, that was better or that was better. Now you have an objective way to evaluate it. So maybe that's what it's going to take for people to really start examining their mechanics and their training and going, yeah, I got to really start pushing the envelope.
I only have experience with parkour people, but one of the things we wanted to do today was try to relate to other sports, because the similarities are there, right? And I think Kyle probably has a lot of experience with this, and yourself, but how hard is it to get other athletes from other sports to do the simple sprinting drills? So like a basketball player, a football player, someone, particularly a good one, particularly someone that's already good. How hard is it to get them, I guess, motivated or disciplined to do a drill to them where it's like, I'm already killing this. This is no problem for me. Do you have to beat them down? Do you have to? What do you do?
Well, we have a. How do I phrase this? Had some experience with some athletes from a variety of, like, field-based sports where sprinting is a huge component to the sport, and drills aren't sexy, they're not fun, nobody likes doing them, but they're extremely important to fix things, or if you've never been introduced to them before, which most of the athletes I've ever worked with have never been introduced to drills in the first place, and myself included when I first started training with Derek years ago. And with that, trying to get the athletes to really focus and pay attention for 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 meters is a challenge. But once they start to see improvements, they start to run faster. Once you add in a test, that test shows them, okay, this is actually working. Maybe there's something to this that's benefiting me. Some people just never buy into it and just never want anything to do with it, and they're good enough in their own head maybe, but generally once applying that sort of test and seeing improvement over time tends to get them to buy in a little bit more. That's been a huge one for me.
You know what my experience has been, and again, if you're working with somebody who makes $20 million a year and he thinks he's fantastic and everybody around him's telling me he's fantastic, very difficult to change behavior. But what ends up always working is when somebody gets hurt, because now they feel like, oh, like I need help, I can't get back on the field. And then if you use those drills, and I use them for hamstring rehab, right? So if you use those drills as part of their recovery and their rehabilitation, now they're like, wow, that actually really helped, right? So I'm not hoping people get injured, but when people get injured, I see that as an opportunity to introduce these things and go, this is, made you better from that hamstring pull or that injury. Imagine what it could do if you kept doing this, right?
And that was a huge one. Used your protocol for hamstrings with a couple guys that were injured, and then they went back to the team and they told the team that, and then seeing the rest of the team come back to us and say, hey, we need to focus on this. They bought in just because the other guys happened to get injured. They happened to do better with it. They happened to get better. So the rest of the team bought in.
Yeah,
real easy.
And that's almost more compelling than them just like losing. So if they lose a game or they lose a competition, sometimes people don't really think about, well, maybe it's my training. So, in the parkour sense, I mean, obviously people are going to get injured. It's so crazy, especially the landing on the rails. But in terms of just dealing with people, like there's going to be people you never reach, but you have to, there's a huge sales job behind it too. Like you have to, maybe you bring in research. Some people don't respond to research. Maybe you bring in some anecdotal story of like, I worked with this celebrity or this athlete and they had a really good result. But there is a sales job behind it.
So I don't know if this would help, but a big part of my job is working with dancers, so ballerinas and figure skaters, and that's always been a massive hurdle. Getting them.
You're doing like sprint coaching
with them. So I do a little bit, well, a little bit different, I guess, but how I kind of go about it. But one of your coaches was coaching a flip, and they were talking about how when you jump, you take your arm with you, and how the hip follows. So kind of with the dancers is how the arms work with kind of the lower extremities and the core. So a big way for me to improve core stability and transfer over to sport has been educating them how when you move your arm, how it affects the pelvis and how it affects the hip. So the drills that they're working on, how it actually might benefit them in performance. And how, because when you're doing that flip, they can't be thinking about where's my arm, where's this, because it's so fast. But in a track drill, I think you can break things down so much that all of a sudden you can work on these little intricacies that you'll need back in your sport. That's been a huge thing for me.
Yep. Definitely.
When I look at when I look at most people in parkour, myself included, I can think of very, very few athletes or circumstances where I see the final 3 or 4 strides into a takeoff look normal or look good. There's usually a lot of cross arm. Sometimes it's because of balance.
Yep.
On their approach, preparation to use the arms. Maybe I'm jumping and I'm going to be like catching a wall or something. So, and there's tons of excuses they're given too. Like, oh, I'm going to be doing this move, so I'm setting my arms for that to do that. And that's been the tricky thing for me right now is I can usually get after doing. So I think it's been since just some of the protocols we've gone over recently. It's been I think 2 months now where I've been trying to implement at least the drills point, and I can get. Without thinking about it, just in my start, there's some better mechanics. But as soon as I hit the takeoff, that's where it's still falling apart right now. So I'm assuming it's just going to take more time.
Yes.
And more cueing and more just like reviewing of footage and things. But that's the interesting thing to me is that I rarely see what looks like a good good mechanics on takeoff. People do all kinds of wacky things with their hands, and they're like, "Oh, I just have weird movement with my arms. That's just part of the way I move. It's fine." It's like, well, probably could be improved, and then you'd be faster and more powerful for it.
Yeah, and you know, we did those interventions 2 months ago, and you're making progress with it, and it's going to take time, right? Because how long have you been doing those other patterns? You know,
everything's a habit.
So I went to my 30th high school reunion, and everybody was pretty much the same, right? So people don't change, but there's ways that you can kind of, you know, push yourself to try something different. But you're right, it has to be constant feedback and constant repetition to do it until, okay, now this feels natural, and my natural motion is more efficient. But it's a lot of work, and I think the problem is that when you have something like professional sports, you know, it's always easy to just watch the cream rise to the top, and you pick those guys, and they're on our team. And I wish there was more actual development and coaching, but there doesn't really need to be, because it just, you know, kind of recycles itself. And I think, you know, I'm trying to push people to think about these things and maybe get outside of their comfort zone when they're coaching. But it's tough. It is really tough. There's a huge selling component, and it's so easy to get a picture or a video of somebody doing something really amazing and just say, like, that's how you do it, right? But they don't really get the backstory on how that came to be about. It might be natural. It might be they put a lot of work in, but unless you really know what they did, you might take it for granted. So, you know, and I think the reason I like this sport is that it's new, and that you don't have, I mean, you tell me that there's a lot of conventions and there's a lot of bad habits and all that. But the good thing is that there's a lot of new stuff that hasn't been explored and different ways of doing things, where if I go talk to somebody who does soccer or basketball or football, there's a lot of just stuff that can't be changed, because that's how it's always been done. And we've been successful, even though they haven't really understood why they've been successful. They attribute it to something else, some ridiculous thing like yelling at people or dumping Gatorade on each other's heads. I don't know. But, you know, at least now you have a chance to really get this sport in its relatively early stages and go, hey, maybe we should start looking at things a little more scientifically, a little more biomechanically, and, you know, not just leave it up to natural selection. So
you mentioned using we're just talking about science now, but you also mentioned using research to prove a point, so to speak. And there actually is a lot of that. There's a lot of the people in parkour that like to speak up about things where it's like, oh, there was a study that did this, or say that they like to use research, which usually basically means they, you know, spent a couple weeks on Google and, you know, found some studies to support their argument. I've always noticed though that you don't do that a lot. You don't fall back on so I don't think you've ever mentioned a single study to me, actually.
Well, it's not that those studies don't exist, but I would rather try to appeal to people's like common sense and say, like, hey, if you look at it this way, and then actually get them to try it, and then it works, and it's like, well, that's my little sample of one study right there. It doesn't mean, you know, a good friend of mine, Ken Clark, does a lot of studies on sprinting, and I actually use his and Peter Wayne's data to say, like, yeah, what I do here is supported by what they've said in terms of like front side mechanics and putting force into the ground. But for the most part, for like athletes, I don't want to pull out papers and say, you know, this is what, you know, the force vector looks like, or the waveform when they hit the ground, because they can't relate to that. So if somebody wants to understand that and talk about it later, we'll pull that information out. But yeah, I don't get hung up in, you know, I have a PhD in this, and, you know, go screw yourself. Like, I know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, just be a good person and say, like, this is what has worked in the past. Why don't you try it? Okay, look, it's worked for you, right? It just makes more sense to me in terms of the coaching workflow. But I don't know, maybe I should have more PowerPoint, you know, whiteboard things going on.
Yeah, I don't know what it does. It probably actually doesn't do much in other sports, but that is something that I've found in the parkour world right now, because you're saying it's new.
Yeah, maybe.
So if I'm coming in as a pioneer or an entrepreneur, as someone who's taking parkour, and I'm trying to organize training for it, it's been very powerful for people to write things and then be able to cite
Sure.
research and that sort of thing
Sure.
because everyone else is doing it anecdotally.
Yeah,
right?
so
everyone else is already doing it. Like
you need
oh,
to
it
put
worked for
some
you, it
force
worked for me.
plates in just ahead of this box here, and you know, so that way you can legitimize everything. But yeah, I mean, if you give somebody a good technique and they go out and they feel better, you know, that's pretty good. I don't know, like yeah, I can jump on that box now, or I can, you know, land on that rail without knocking my front teeth out. Yeah, that's pretty convincing for me. I won't be doing it, but so. But you know, I mean, I just want to thank everybody for showing up. It just gives us a different forum. And if you take a look around this place, we'll put up some shots. Hopefully, it's just an interesting place to be in terms of the environment. Nice open air environment. They got some areas where you can sprint. They got the sprung floor. It's just a very, very different training environment, which appeals to me because you know I've seen the usual stuff, right? So I just think this is kind of cool. My kids come to summer camps here, and they have a great time. Like they were a little upset at me that I didn't bring them today, but you know I can't watch them at the same time. But you know I like
Let them do their own thing.
yeah.
It's open gym.
Yeah, the dental bills are going up, but it's just like an emerging sport. Even though you guys may think it's been here a long time, compared to other sports, it's relatively
Oh yeah,
new,
I'm
right?
not pretending it's
Yeah.
old compared
So-
to anything else.
So I like the idea that we can come and talk about something as basic as sprinting and how it applies, and hopefully we get more people experimenting with it and trying it. And if anybody wants to come down to Origins and you know buzz me and say, hey, come down, let's look at sprinting. You know, Renee will get on my butt and get me down here and do some stuff because I think it's a good place to kind of experiment. So, yeah. Any other questions before we sign off? No? Well, thanks for everybody coming out, and thanks to Derek for putting on a great production. I think he threw this together with Renee in like an hour, figuring out how to do the live event. So that's awesome. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can hit up Renee, myself on social media, and even put some more questions on the video, and we'll try to answer your questions. But thank you very much for putting this on.
Yeah, thank you for coming up with the idea and
Yeah,
reaching out to me and seeing
I
if
had
we
nothing
would do
better
it
to
last
do.
minute.
No, but I just figure we have free time. We might as well jump at the chance, and you know Kyle is out here, and so get him involved and Santro, yeah, and just get some people together and just have an opportunity to talk about stuff. So thank you.
So like Derek just said, this will be available online. So once this live recording's finished, it'll probably usually takes like an hour or so for YouTube to do its thing,
okay.
and then it'll be up for people to watch. So we'll provide a link, and then you can share that with
That's
your
awesome.
following as well.
I love technology.
It's so easy. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. That's awesome. I don't know how it's going to look, but thanks for your feedback and input and stuff. But yeah, if you want to have any ideas on things you can do, I'll give you all my contact info.